All right, welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new. If you are a regular Commander viewer and you want to focus on specifically Commander content, this video actually is not that, so I recommend you check out the other videos in the channel. Instead, what I want to do for this video is something a little bit different. I want to attempt to sell you on a different way of playing the game, essentially a new format that I'm trying to gin up interest in, because I'm actually finding it to be very enjoyable. And then I will run you through some games and you can see why I think it's so much fun. But first, let me tell you a little bit about it. Basically, the goal of this format is to solve basically three problems that I see. One is the main sort of beef that I have with Commander as it stands. One is the main sort of issues that I see with vintage Magic as it stands, and I guess the third one is availability of which tends to be challenging in both. Like, for example, if you're a young person, you may not have the money at that point in your life to afford all the expensive cards that you would need for either format. And if you are an established person, you may have the money that you can spend to afford the cards for either format, but then you might also have, in terms of income, but then you might also have expenses like family and home and whatnot, and be unable to afford the cards anyway. Even though you have the money coming in, you have places you need to invest and other things you need to do with it. You know, you got to buy Christmas gifts for your kids or grandkids. It's like, you know, can you really afford to buy that Mishra's Workshop or whatever, right? So for a lot of people, I think price is definitely an issue. However, I also think that when you do have the money to afford nice things, most of us like to have those things. And so what I'd like to do is start with the first issue, that issue. I want to knock that out and say that in this format, you would be able to run proxies. You can just proxy up a card and you can play with it. And there's no like shame or blame in using a proxy in this format. It's simply the matter that if you enjoy the format and you enjoy playing with really nice looking Magic cards, you might want to collect those cards when you can afford to. Most of us would and don't need to be told that, and I think that it would actually be a benefit to the game, because people would be interested in doing things like maybe saving up and purchasing a Mox Emerald or something, right? Like eventually, or maybe saving up and getting that, I don't know, that Tolarian Academy or something, right? So, you know, there are things that these are things that I don't own. I have to use proxies and paper. But online, fortunately, these cards are all very accessible. And unfortunately, I'm in a place where I can't afford to get the really nice, good art for most of them. So I'm using the junky Time Walk art and junky Mox Sapphire and stuff. It's like $5, $10 tops, something like that for these cards. But so it still costs a little bit. I mean, it's still like, it's not like it's free, but far more affordable. You know, it's what, a fraction of 1% of the cost, the offline version. But someday, unfortunately, having sold my vintage collection when I was young and dumb and all the rest, I never have been able to replace it. So someday maybe I'll start by trying to replace my online cards with their very nice and beautiful original art counterparts, and then maybe, I don't know, maybe if I strike oil in the backyard or something, then I can think about getting the offline cards. But we'll see. Perhaps in retirement or something. I don't know. Anyway, so my idea is, let's make the format open to everybody. Getting back on the point. So now, the real reason why I like this format, I think it solves some major issues with Commander and Vintage. The biggest issue with Vintage, besides the price that I see, is that the decks are far too consistent. Having 4 copies of all their payout cards of what they're trying to do, or their enablers. So, like, for example, a deck will have 4 Oath of Druids, or it'll have 4 Bazaar Baghdad's, or it'll have 4 Mishra's Workshops, or, you know, fill in the blank, right? So, and these decks, you know, 4 copies of Doomsday or whatever, right? And these decks, like, I think if they did a better job curating the vintage ban list, then the format would actually be far more interesting. But because they leave all these cards unrestricted, the format is kind of garbage because it's literally almost like playing five. It's playing a variety of decks, but you're going to face that same variety of decks over and over and over with no room for innovation because they're too consistent, too good. They might switch out a card here and there. Somebody adds a mental misstep when it's printed to their deck or whatever, and then this or that. But ultimately, like, you're just going to be facing the same garbage again and again and again, and it's just mind-numbing to me, having played for 30 years, to see innovation stop. And that's what I don't want to see. I enjoy like, maybe this format will end up in the same situation, but I guess I don't mind it as much in Singleton formats if certain decks dominate and certain decks tend to be the you frequently play against them. I don't mind it as much when the consistency of the decks is not as high, right? So like, if you're playing let's say like this deck that I have in front of you becomes the dominant deck and we end up facing it a lot. Well, whatever it's trying to do is not going to be something that's the same every game, because like some games I get the One Ring out, and some games I go for Hull Breacher, Time Twister, and some games I try to lock you under a Godfrey statue, and sometimes I just Crucible World Strip Mine you. And none of that's super fun if you're on the receive side, but on the other hand, it's very interesting to me that it's going to be different each game, and there's a constant sort of adjustment that has to take place about how you set up and what you're trying to do, and how you get into the end zone. Basically, how do I score a touchdown, right? Is this the goal is the same every game. I'm always trying to score the touchdown, like, to use a football analogy, but there's a lot of different styles of play that I can make to get there. So that's what I find interesting. Not necessarily that the end goal is particularly interesting. It's always the same, run downfield, or in this format, get complete control, or set up a combo or whatever. But how you get there, I think, is interesting. So by being a Singleton format, I think a lot of the variety of decks may or may not continue to exist. We won't know till we try it. Like, we won't know what kind of variety is out there, but the variety within the games that you play should be much, much higher, and I think that's super interesting. And I think it solves that problem of vintage. Then on the Commander side, I think there are quite a few issues actually that I would like to see improved upon, and I'm trying to sort of implement them into this format. One, I think 40 life, just off the top, is unhealthy for the game. Unfortunately, cards just aren't designed for 40 life. There's lots of abusive cards that take advantage of that 40 life. First of all, cards like Necropotence and Ad Nauseam, cards I use, don't get me wrong, but I use them because how could I not, right? They're ridiculous in a 40 life format. So Sarah Ascendant is another example, and also 40 life has a suppressing feeling. It makes aggro so bad that you don't have aggro, like, you lose the variety of aggro that you should have in a format. Take this deck, for example. At 20 life, I might easily just die to goblins, right? Like, I might have a really good game against another control deck and just lose to aggro really quickly, and I won't have time to potentially win because they can just beat me down. But if you doubled my life total, I have plenty of time to recover and get my stuff going, right? And that's the problem that I see in Commanders, is just aggro's just pushed out of the format, and cards that abuse 40 life are far too strong. Sylvan Library is way too good. Paying 12 or 8 life and then 8 life again is nothing. It's trivial when you have 40 to start with. Far, far less trivial in a format like this, right? So I think that's one of the problems. So boom, let's talk 40 life, let's make it 20 like I think it should be. If we need to adjust it from there for whatever reason, I suppose we could, but I say let's just start with where the game was designed around. Secondly, in Commander, I think that unfortunately, I think the Commander itself is a huge problem. I think that the fact that you can pluck a win condition out of the ether means that so much of your deck can be devoted to just pure ramp that you, especially because it's a win con, you can replay if you have more ramp. Like, the deck is designed around ramping as hard and fast as you can and getting as much mana in play as you can, and then just snatching your win condition out of thin air and winning with it. And I think that that's not, I don't enjoy that, frankly. I don't enjoy having a win condition just pop into my hand whenever I need one, or my opponent's hand whenever they need one, because I think that it hurts deck design. I think it focuses deck design too much on just pure ramp and then interaction with trying to protect whatever it is that you're doing. But I think that it loses something in the sense of you don't have to construct too much around how am I gonna, what if I gas out, right? Like, what if I just dump my hand and play, I have nothing to do with it, right? That you don't have to answer that question. The answer's in this nebulous zone, the command zone. It's in your command zone, just waiting for you to snatch it out and win with it. Like, take Minsk and Boo is a good example. If you go first turn Tinderwall, second turn land, sack, and you have 4 mana, and there's no Minsk and Boo in the command zone, if you're not holding something to do with that mana, like, you don't win the game. Like, turn 1 Tinderwall is not turn 2, like, game board dominance by any stretch. But in a Minsk and Boo deck where Minsk and Boo's in the command zone, a first turn Tinderwall is almost an unbeatable turn 1. That's a little bit dumb, right? Like, and you could argue, well, Minsk and Boo's the problem, let's ban that. I mean, you could argue that, but I say the command zone's the issue. Ultimately, I think eventually replace Minsk and Boo with fill in the blank, and you're just going to have the same problem repeat itself over and over and over. It's the fact that you can just grab value out of thin air. It can't be interacted with outside of a counterspell. Like, I can't Thoughtseize that card I can't Thoughtseize the Minsk and Boo out of my opponent's hand. I can't, there's like very little I can do to actually stop it. And you say, well, maybe you can kill the Tinderwall. Okay, sure, but replace Tinderwall with Jewel Lotus, right? Like, it's the same problem at the end of the day. And I don't love that. So let's take the command zone out of play and see what happens if the Singleton format crumbles and falls apart without that, or if it actually blossoms, which is what I think will happen. So, too much life, command zone is a problem. And then I think that I honestly I prefer the ban list for Vintage because I think that in a 100-card Singleton format, you're going to have wild, crazy hands, and that should be exciting. But I also think that most of the cards that would allow you to recover from that also happen to be banned in Commander. So it's like cards that would contribute to that problem are banned, but cards that would solve that problem are also banned. However, the cards that contribute to the problem are in greater abundance, as I see it, than the cards that would solve it. So if my opponent, for example, does, because they're always printing new cards. So in other words, you ban the answers to the threats, and you ban the threats, and you think everything's fine. But more threats are constantly being printed all the time. More answers rarely are. They always prefer to print threats over answers. Like when they printed Planeswalkers, suddenly everyone's scrambling to figure out what to do about this card because they printed a bunch of Planeswalkers, they didn't print a bunch of Planeswalker removal. And they've slowly started doing that over time, but as they're doing that, they're printing more and more. And that's just Planeswalkers as a class of cards without getting into specifics, right? So I guess what I'm getting at is that cards like Balance, cards like Caracas, which you can now play because there's no commander to worry about. Cards like Tinker, Tolarian Academy can be both the problem card, I dump my hand in Balance, or I Library of Alexandria to get overwhelming advantage early, or I just do some crazy stuff with Tinker and put something nutty into play and win the game on the spot. So it can be part of the problem, but they can also be part of the solution to the problem. So my opponent does Channel Emrakul and I go Landmox Balance, and the game continues, right? My opponent does something nuts, and I on my turn it doesn't, but if it doesn't kill me, maybe on my turn I can generate enough mana with a Tolarian Academy. Maybe I play Mox Tolarian Academy, tap for 4 Jace, and I bounce your Channel to Emrakul, for example, right? Like, so there's ways I can get back into the game using ridiculous cards to make ridiculous plays that don't always result in a bad game. They can sometimes and often will result in an interesting and good game. It will make the game more fun when you can do stuff like that on both sides of the table. So that's kind of what I guess what I'm getting at. And like, of course, in that game, that channeled Emrakul, you're starting the game at 5 life, but so are they, right? So they channeled him out for 15, and they time walk and they attack you for 15, and then on your turn you deal with it. Now you're both at 5, and you got to play a game from there. And it's a tight game and it's a scary one, but it's far more interesting. So I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at with my philosophy of what I find interesting in Magic. It should be possible to do insane things, and occasionally that will result in just instant wins, but it shouldn't be mandatory, and it should not. And when you do something crazy, you should always sort of live in fear that the opponent can also do something crazy, because the number of crazy things out there are higher, and it makes you have to be more thoughtful and careful in the decisions, like when you put your shields down, what choices you make, because they could always come back, right? Like you're way ahead. You have 7 cards in hand and 15, mana in play, and the opponent only has 2 lands and 1 card, and they're like, hey, at the end of your turn, Hurkyl's recall you, and you're like, oh crap. So you fill your hand up, and now you discard down to 7, and most of your artifacts they're all gone. And then, on my turn, draw, top deck balance. Oh wait, now all my creatures are dead. Now I have no cards in hand. I'm down to 2 lands. Game on, right? Like, that ability is lost in Commander most of the time. You pretty much get behind and then you die, is what happens in Commander most of the time. And I do have a channel devoted to the exceptions to that rule. Mostly, it is hard to find, and that's why I don't make videos as frequently as I'd like. Anyway, so I've said all that, so I want to pitch to you the way this format works. If it hasn't already become clear, real quick, it's a vintage legal format. Everything is restricted. Everything in Magic's restricted, and if it's banned in Vintage, it's banned here, with one exception. If you're playing offline, unfortunately, I cannot do anything about the fact that this is not legal online. So online, you just won't be able to play this way. But offline, Chaos Orb is legal. Why? Because it's a problem-solving card. It's a very good card. It's a problem-solving card everyone can get access to, and I think that's super important. You can leave it in play and just prevent yourself from getting comboed out by most permanents. Like your opponent can't time vault combo you out. It's easily fetchable. It's recurable. It's a very good, a very interesting card, and it's unfortunate that they don't just print it online and make it into a Vindicate or something. But for those of you who would play this format offline, Chaos Orb would be legal. Online, it is not available, so we just got to run with what we have. So in the meantime, vintage legal is legal here, plus Chaos Orb. 20 life format, yes, on sideboards, which is another problem with Commander, is that you only play game 1 and then that's it. So even these like super narrow hyper focused decks that take advantage of the fact that there's no sideboards suddenly have to contend with a sideboard. For example, somebody's like mono black just discard deck has to deal with, like, maybe I sideboard in Compost or whatever, right? So maybe your mono red aggro deck has to contend with the card Chill, right? So anyway, sideboard's legal. Sideboards also make some cards that are sort of useless in Commander more interesting, or cards that are good in Commander greater, I guess. Karn gets far more interesting, Karn the Great Creator, because he can now actually, his -2 actually does something when it usually doesn't. Cunning Wish is a very interesting card. Burning Wish becomes an interesting card. Like, you get more stuff like that, as well as the fact that you just get, like I said, you get an actual sideboard, so you have to think about games 2 and 3. So that's the rules for the format. 100 card minimum, no maximum. You can play as many as you want, of course. You can thin your deck out as much as you'd like. And like I said, it's all Singleton 20 life. So that's it. And what makes this format interesting for those of you who'd like to play it and you cannot find other VS opponents, vintage Singleton opponents. So if you're looking for VS opponents, because that's what I've been calling it, is just VS, vintage Singleton. And if you have a better name, let me know. But if you're looking to play versus other opponents, then what you can do is you can just jump into a vintage queue, because everything's vintage legal and you're playing with one of everything. You can just play real vintage decks. Now, are you going to win? Probably not. They're a real vintage deck and you are a 100 card Singleton deck. But you could at least test your deck. And with that in mind, I decided to jump into some vintage queues. I guess you could talk about the build of this deck, but you've certainly been staring at it this whole time. If you have been interested, you probably have been sort of running through it with your eyes to see what you like and what you don't like about it. You will most likely have picked out certain things like Hull Breacher, Time Twister, Notion Thief, Time Twister, Orcish Bowmaster's Time Twister. Those are some interesting combos. We've got Time Vault with Manifold Key. We have Karn, who can reach into the sideboard and grab Voltaic Key if I need to set the combo up. Of course, Manifold Key is quite nice with like Mana Vault or Mana Crypt as well. I am playing Crypt and Vault and Ancient Tomb, all of which are quite dangerous in a 20 life format, far less safe than they are normally, as well as the One Ring. So fortunately, I have like Tinker to get rid of some of them, and in other cases, I might just die to my own equipment. It kind of is what it is. I can also bounce with Teferi, can bounce some of it back to my hand, and I have Transmute Artifact to potentially put some combos together, or just get rid of some really inconvenient threats, cards like that in my deck. There's a lot of other interesting things going on here. I think the fact that Urza Saga can go get half of the Time Vault combo. It can also get it can solve problems. XL, let me make sure. Yeah, search your library for an artifact card and that costs 0 or 1. Oh no, Saga cannot get Portable Hole, but Tezzeret can. I have been back and forth on whether or not Portable Hole belongs in the main for like Tezzeret and like Fabricate, or if it belongs in the side for a Karn. I think it probably belongs in the main. I guess Saga can't get it because it costs 1 but not CMC 1. Anyway, having settled that, I get Gorilla Shaman in the main deck, which is really interesting because, of course, I'm expecting to face a suite of Moxes and Lotus and all that good stuff. I don't know, I think it's just very interesting, and I'm going to run Mental Misstep because I want to stop an Ancestral Recall. Misdirection gets far more interesting, acting as a potential force of will for an Ancestral Recall that happens to retarget it to me, which I think is very cool. I have a handful of creatures. I don't have currently Dark Confidant in here. A little worried about the fact that I'm at 20 life and he seems kind of scary. There's some other things that aren't in here. Overall, I think it's a good start to a deck, and you could certainly do well here, but this is not by any means the only deck that could exist in this format and be quite good. There is a lot of room for options here, and you could play something like Oath of Druids or a Dredge deck. It's just going to be quite a bit more challenging, since Mulligan into Bazaar Baghdad or whatever is not necessarily going to win you the game in a Singleton 100 card format like it does in Vintage. Alright, so having settled that, I actually played some games, and here they are. All of my wins and losses in Vintage, playing against Vintage opponents in the tournament practice room. So I go into constructed Vintage tournament practice, and I look for someone like this guy, and I would jump in with my Singleton deck against his 60 card, 4 copies of everything he wants to put 4 copies of that isn't restricted, like full power Vintage deck. And the results of that have been a string of constant wins, with the 1 game loss here but a match win. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting, so maybe we should run through what that looks like, and you might enjoy seeing this deck in action. I think there might have been a few changes in the deck composition here and there. I think I was main decking Red Blasts, and now I have Flusterstorm. Maybe Red Blasts are better. I'm not exactly sure, because I don't have like actual Singleton opponents to face. I would love to have somebody show up and start playing me, but in the meantime, let's just take a look at what I was doing and how it turned out. So this is, I haven't reviewed these games, so we will find out Very strange for me to start at like 20 life, and I keep doing this thing where I keep clicking over here to see what their commander is, and then I'm like, wait a minute, there is no commander. So look at this hand, very clunky, very mid. Insane if my opponent goes like first turn Ancestral, but outside of that, I don't know. Tough to decide if I keep this or not, but I went ahead and just kept anyway, because Workshop Crucible gives me a certain measure of safety if they are playing a Wasteland deck, and the misdirection can help, so we'll see. But I might be in big trouble, and yeah, I'm playing against the full power Vintage deck, and I am indeed in big trouble, right? So, well, let's hope I draw a land, and then maybe things get more interesting. I did not actually draw a land. I am feeling like this game is probably over, but who knows? It's Vintage. All right, my one has a Library of Alexandria, Dark Ritual, and runs out a Time Twister, and I just can't do anything about it. You can see I was trying Paradoxical Outcome and Ancient Grudge out. They go for a Mentor, and I decided to force a will, the Monastery Mentor. So this was a very rough initial start with a counterspell that I draw off as Time Twister. And at the end of their turn, I go ahead and tap City of Brass, and I Enlighten Tutor. I've got so many problems over there. They've got way too much mana. They've got a Library of Alexandria, but I decide, you know what? I'm just going to go in on a God Pharaoh statue, and I'll clean up the nonsense in a moment. Let's see if I can stop them from comboing me out. So I do that. My opponent draws in response and finds nothing, and then draws to their 9th card, and they can't use their library yet, and concedes because I think they were a combo deck, and they do not have any solution to GPS. And of course, in short order, I'm going to blow up multiple mana sources over there and start drawing cards. This is not a very clean win by any means. Grudge is a card I might actually run in my current version of the deck, but I'm not. I probably should put that somewhere, maybe in my sideboard. Anyway, having said all that, I am not currently running Paradoxical Outcome, nor am I running Ancient Grudge in my current version, so you can see the deck has evolved. Alright, so now let's try against Play 4C. I started out 5 colors and decided I wanted to contract that into 4 and make myself less vulnerable to mana screw, basically. Alright, so here you go, yeah. So I'm running main deck Pyro, and my opponent, another Academy player, just lovely. Fortunately, I have a pretty good start, I would say. And I'm going to go for an Imperial Seal into Balance. Let's see if I can punish my opponent here. Unfortunately, they have Flusterstorm, so that is not going to work for me. I am not going to be paying 4 extra for that balance. Alright, so I cannot Mind Twist my opponent with a balance to make their Ancestral less painful. If you didn't see what my opponent did there, at the end of my turn, they cycled a Lorien Revealed and got an island. So on my turn, I'm going to go ahead and main phase Ancestral Recall, and my opponent is actually playing a Mana Drain deck, which is awesome. I've got Pyroblast here, which would have been Flusterstorms. It'd still be fine, but I'm going to go ahead and Pyro that, and then my opponent forces a will, so they get the Mana Drain off. Not good, but they are down to 1 card, so there's something there, as am I, unfortunately. And have a Lotus into, like, this just looks so nuts, into Triskel, what? Triskalavus? Like, why are they playing Triskalavus? I guess, I mean, it's really good with Abyss and Moat, if they're playing an Abyss and Moat in their deck. Remember, they're playing a 60-card Vintage deck. This is so, everything they did was all, like, par for the course, but what the hell is this? I have no idea, but I'm happy to see it because, you know, I'm not dead. Alright, so nice Wasteland off the top there. Opponent has no cards in hand. I'm going to Fabricate, and I think for a while and decide, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get the One Ring. And then I was like, do I want to kill with the Wasteland or not? I feel like it's just too risky to leave that card in play, so I do, in fact, kill it. And thankfully, top deck a land. So now I get to play the One Ring, which will prevent me from taking damage, and go ahead and use it. The Trisk will hit me for 0 this turn. Opponent finds a top, and tops into a fetch, and then hits me for 0. Alright, so we're going to use it during upkeep, looking for tutors. I don't find one, but I do find an Urza's Saga into, well, I find Demonic Tutor, not a Vampiric. I'm going to untap and ring again, and from there my opponent just decides to scoop it up, which makes sense. They were probably toast, but pretty interesting stuff here. I would have I don't know how I would have. I don't know if I would have how I would have played this. I know my opponent has a Sensei's Divining Top on top, so I would have slammed Narset here. But then they could have just swung into Narset. They could have swung into Narset and taken it to 1, and I think that would have been fine because I don't need Narset to give me cards. I just need it to suppress them. The 1 ring plus Manifold Key is going to give me boatloads of cards, right? Or they swing into me and hit me for 4, and then I take 3, and then from there, Narset's in play, and I have Demonic Tutor in hand, so I'd win that game for sure. So either way, I think I'm in pretty good shape. And then I can clean up their board with Mox Monkey eating all this stuff, and of course Demonic Tutor will take care of Triscolavis. What do you tutor for here? A couple of options. It depends on if I've got a way to get rid of the 1 ring, because what I can tutor for here is Time Vault, and then Manifold Key will give me infinite turns, and I just have to make sure that my own 1 ring doesn't kill me. So that's one of the ways that I could have won from here. But either way, opponent scoops it up, so we play game 2 against this fully powered vintage deck running Triscolavis. And this is a keep, right? Opponent has Mox Jet. Alright, I've got a Karn. That's interesting. I'm going to go ahead and just play the Opal in case my opponent does like a Time Twister or something and wins a Force of Will battle. Plus, if they want to fight over the Mox Opal, I'm fine with it. They go and grab Ancestral. I'm really hoping that they... So I'm going to pause here. So I really want my opponent to Ancestral Recall. So what I decide to do is I fetch at the end of their turn for a tapped Steam Vents. And the reason I get tapped Steam Vents is 1, it indicates I might have Red Elemental Blast. And 2, I put it into play tapped, which means, hey, opponent, now's a really good time for you to cast Ancestral Recall because, I'm all tapped out and you don't want me to untap with this Red Elemental Blast that I have sort of indicated is in my hand, potentially. So I really want him to play it at the end of their turn so then I could force a negation it. But my opponent doesn't take the bait. And I top deck Red Elemental Blast. It's so awesome. All right. So anyway, now we're playing a fun game of draw go around the power of the Ancestral Recall that I have to fight with. I have to contend with. All right. So I draw an Impulse. Opponent goes for Ancestral. Of course, I'm going to try to counter it, and then unfortunately they have Flusterstorm. So do not get to stop their draw 3. And I also have just wasted my turn essentially because I cannot Impulse into mana. So I'm done for the turn. That sucks. Looks like I'm losing this game. I am definitely losing this game, but I have not lost this game yet. It is vintage after all. Alright, so I draw Orcish Bowmasters, which is extremely nice. Here, potentially. I'm going to play his Intuition and offers me triple Goblin Welder. I am super thrilled to give them a Goblin Welder with this Orcish Bowmasters in my hand. At the end of their turn, I am going to Impulse, though. I can Bowmaster in a moment. I just want to get cards in my hand. I was looking specifically for land. Find me some land, please. There we go. And I'll pass with the Bowmasters in play. Right now, there's nothing in their graveyard that I'm worried about them welding, so I don't have any rush at all to do anything at all. Here, I've got Counterspell, I've got a Force to back it up. Soon I'll have Snapcaster, and I've got Bowmasters to deal with their welder and pressure them. And if they try to play a card like Brainstorm or something, then I can flash out Bowmasters in response, kill their welder, and then nug them for like 3 and then win the game that way, Force of Will or whatever. So I don't know why my opponent conceded right here. I guess they were a little impatient, but interestingly, to me at least, despite the fact that they won a counter war over an Ancestral Recall, I feel like I'm winning this game. I am in very, very strong position here to win this game. And that was super cool, so it's fine to get the win. Alright, now I play against Nivek Vamps 2821, and this one is the only opponent who's actually gotten a win against this deck so far. And I have to take a mulligan, and I've got to take a mulligan again. That's no good, and this will have to do. We'll see. I decided to get rid of Tinker because I don't have an artifact. I could get one off the Hull Breacher, but it's a little risky, and I'd rather just keep all my land. Opponent goes Workshop and a Crypt and a Soul Ring. Not looking good, and I screw up royally, and I have no idea why I didn't mental misstep the Soul Ring, which is what I should have done. I think I was kind of, I was just clicking like, yeah, whatever, and then realized, oh crap, I just didn't counter a Soul Ring. What am I doing? And now there's a Chalice of the Void on 1, so I can't even Enlightened Tutor. I can't Mental Misstep. When it has a Strip Mine, to just add insult to injury. And runs out of God Pharaoh's statue, and I'm like, okay, you got me. Game 2. All right, let's go. I got vintaged. I also, though, really should not have let my opponent have that Soul Ring. It definitely made the game. It went from super hard to impossible, right? What a great hand here, though. Going first, I'm going to go ahead and actually lead off this way. My intention here is that I want to protect myself from Wasteland for now. I want to get double blue for Mana Drain, which Lorien Revealed can help me with, but I also want to be able to, I have to sack in response to this so he doesn't name my land, I think. And then I realize it says non-land, but whatever. So they named Mox Opal. Alright. So let's get set up with a Mana Drain. Ooh, Mox Monkey. Nice, that should come in handy. And then the idea here is we're going to try to get the library down and then refill the hand with the One Ring and start using both the One Ring and the library and just take off from there. And if my opponent doesn't do anything really, then of course the library will win the game for me. So they go for a Golos. This is perfect. 5 mana. Beautiful. Delicious. Wonderful Golos. Thank you very much. And I top deck Time Walk. Ugh. So down comes the One Ring. I get to draw a card. I get to play a land, take another turn, play a Mox Monkey, eat their artifact, and pass to myself for the turn. Well, I get to One Ring during upkeep, ponder, and I don't see anything I like, so I choose to shuffle, but unfortunately we don't get there. I'm going to pass this way because if they have a Wasteland, I still want to be able to remand. I'm also quite happy to just trade off my Gorilla Shaman if my opponent's down to 3 cards at this point after all. Okay, so this doesn't look like a card I want in play, so we'll just remand that. My opponent gets a Black Lotus and slams it back down into play. Yuck. So I no longer have the option to block, so I do have to pay attention to my life total. Or at least I don't have the option to block profitably. Alright, so taking a beating. So as you can see, like, aggro has far more of an opportunity to win an aggressive strategy, but here we get to do some really, really absurd things with Manifold Key and the One Ring. Now I'm going to Manifold Key into that. And of course I sideboarded in a bunch of extra artifact removal. Here I get to put a Time Walk on top of my deck, plow the threat, and I'm just going to chill on the Gorilla Shaman for now. I'm not feeling like I need to attack and pressure my opponent. I don't know if there's some kind of haste card that I need to worry about, but if there is, I want to be ready to deal with it. Opponent has a Time Vault. They're down to only 1 card in hand, however. Alright, so I was thinking about whether or not I want to make this play. I decided, you know what, that's just too dangerous to leave it in play. I could Gorilla Shaman it, but let's just get rid of it. There's the Time Walk that I put on top. I've got to get rid of my own One Ring here, but you know, am I going to find a way? Sure, I just did. Go ahead and oops, I was just about, so I need to pause. So that play was me casting what I thought was Tinker to eat my One Ring and end this game. Instead, I accidentally clicked on Time Twister and reloaded my opponent's hand with his 7 mana in play. Oh, so bad. And I still have my One Ring in play, so I had to Teferi it back to my hand so that I don't die. Fortunately, I did draw a Time Walk. I mean, I'm like winning in spite of myself here, and I'm gonna I can Manifold Key there, but we'll do that in a moment. Well, I drew Tezzeret. Never mind. Let's go ahead and just Tez into boom Time Vault. We've got Time Vault Key assembled. Despite the fact they have 7 cards and 7 mana, they're never going to get a turn to spend it, and Tezzeret will deal 20 to them in just a couple turns. So my opponent concedes, and we go on to game 3. And now the Workshop deck is going first. And that's how the Workshop deck usually wins when it wins. I decided to mulligan, even though I had a defensive hand. It had a defensive hand with no game plan at all. And so I mulligan into this, which actually has a game plan. Find myself some Moxen, which I can then play despite the Sphere of Resistance making it quite annoying. And then my opponent slams Null Rod, and I'm like, oh god. Look at my hand. Like, Null Rod's so bad, and there's a Wasteland there too. So I'm going to go ahead and Enlighten Tutor in response, because I really need some mana, but what good is artifact mana against the Sphere of Resistance? Well, I can get an Urza's Saga. That does make mana. All right, so my opponent plays Revoker, names the One Ring, has a Time Vault. I mean, I am just so hosed this game, right? Like, this, how do you win this game? It's just impossible, right? Well, this is vintage Singleton, baby. I got balance, but I can't cast it because Sphere of Resistance prevents me from doing so. So maybe I can get to the point where I can balance. I might have a way back in this game, but currently, nothing. And I didn't even find a land to make a robot and stop myself from getting beat on by these things. I will, however, search for a manifold key and then balance here. Thankfully, having top decked the land that turn, if I didn't draw land that turn, yeah, I was dead. But I now have at least some kind of game. My opponent had to discard a Null Rod. And I've got a key set up. Unfortunately, Null Rod and Sphere of Resistance make it hard to both play the card that combos with it as well as to do anything with it. Like, I don't have any way to... The Null Rod's going to prevent me from doing Vault Key, and I can't even play the Vault because, you know, it costs mana. But my opponent is top-decking mana sources over there, and I just tutored for an Academy. And I'm about to Narset into a Mana Vault. No point in playing it yet. I can't, also, because of the Sphere of Resistance. It costs 2 mana. But because I Imperial Sealed for Academy, I can now... Oh, look, Gorilla Shaman. Tasty. I can now grab an Impulse, play a Gorilla Shaman, and we're getting very close to this game being over if my opponent doesn't find some pressure soon, even though I am at 6. I am coming back from just an absolute insane deficit. I'm not even going to bother with their stuff. I'm just going to Impulse and try to win the game on my side. There's a Teferi. We bounce the Null Rod, and now artifacts do something. I can play the Mana Vault and Mana Vault into the Time Vault, and with exactly 1 mana left, I can untap the Time Vault and take another turn after this one and do that forever. My opponent is dead. What an amazing comeback for a Singleton deck against a vintage Workshop deck going first turn, like Sphere of Resistance, right? I think this format's so fun and interesting. Like, it's so awesome. And then finally I've got this game against Disgorge Vivo, and we'll take a look at how this played out. This is with the closest to current version of the deck, basically. It's basically is the version of the deck that you've seen. I think that in these games I actually had the Pyroblast main, and maybe I should, but you know, I don't know. I'm on the fence about it. Anyway, so this is a great hand, an obvious keep, right? All right, my opponent leads off Tropical Island, Mox Emerald, Oath. I'm like, oh god. All right, I get to go Watergate. I'm gonna pause here. If you don't know how Oath works in Vintage, because you think, well, that's all right, I only have like 5 or 6 creatures in my deck, just don't play a creature. There's a land called Forbidden Orchard that when it taps, your opponent puts a 1/1 into play. So my opponent's going to be playing 4 of those. So he's going to feed me creatures, and there's like, it's very hard. Like, that's the game, right? He's got the Oath out. He's going to feed me creatures, and then he's going to Oath into, you know, broken stuff. So I think these days, well, we'll see actually, because you'll get to see. But anyway, I have a Savage start, and I decided to take a little bit of a risk here and tinker away my Jet instead of my Opal, which turns my Opal off. So it's like tinkering away 2 mana. It might have been a mistake. Maybe I should have tinkered away the Opal, but I mean, I figure if the Tinker resolves, I probably win the game, so maybe it won't matter. Anyway, my opponent forced negations with only 2 cards left in hand, exiling Show and Tell. Now, I could have pondered there first to try to find like a Force of Will effect, but I don't have a second blue card, so that's why I didn't. I wanted to see what would come of that, and I wanted to be able to pay for a possible Daze. So since now I know that that's not resolved, I'm going to go ahead and ponder and look for a refill. And I find Demonic Tutor and Mana Vault, so I set up my deck with Mana Vault on top. That way, if my opponent does have some kind of discard, I'll draw into Demonic Tutor. They just draw and pass for the turn, so alright, let's get the Vault down and cast Demonic Tutor with an active Mox Opal. And I decide, you know what I want? I want to get Karn. I'm going to get Karn, slam, exile the... slam, used a -2, and I had Portable Hole in the sideboard, so perfect. Goodbye Mox Emerald, goodbye Oath of Druids. I currently have Portable Hole in the main because I have more ways to tutor for it in the main, even though it was really cool here. Next thing I do is immediately grab the Mycosynth Lattice, and from there my opponent concedes. So now If you don't know this combo, all permanents are artifacts, and all artifacts have no abilities if my opponent controls them. So I slam this into play, and none of my opponent's lands, none of their artifacts make mana. They have no way to make mana at all, other than something like Elvish Spirit Guide into like a disenchant effect, like a natural Nature's Claim, right? Elvish Spirit Guide into Nature's Claim. Well, Elvish Spirit Guide is not a card you're going to see in an out deck. So basically, they cannot make mana for the rest of the game, and the game is super over. Oops. So we go into game 2 against setup today. Yeah. So we go into game 2 against this opponent. So I beat the turn 1 Oath of Druids, and I beat the turn 1 Null Rod against these like vintage decks, and I'm feeling, pretty good. It's a good feeling. I get to sideboard, and against them I decide that I'm not going to sideboard a lot. I actually made a small error. I left in Ragavan and like Gorilla Shaman, and I left in Notion Thief. I left in Hall Breacher, but I should have actually sideboarded out, probably sideboarded out Spellseeker, but it's hard to say because the ability to Spellseeker for removal is good. So I can't remember what exactly I pulled. I only brought in like one card. I brought in like Fracture or something and then called it good. Anyway, so I've got this hand. Looks good to me. It's playable. It plays. Opponent takes a look at it, plays first turn Oath of Druids. So I fortunately top deck an Urza's Saga, and I lead off with Saga here. Normally, like, Saga can be used to pressure your opponent by the blue mage by making creatures and attacking them, but of course that's a horrible idea against an Oath of Druids. But but I decided to lead off with Saga here because the flexibility of being able to get like a Soul Ring and playing a long game against this opponent, or a Black Lotus or something, is just way too good. So I'll immediately slam the Saga into play. I'm hoping they don't have the land that forces me to have creatures. I don't see it here, so I'm thinking I'm all right, at least for a little while. I draw Mana Vault, so I'm going to go ahead and play that, see what happens, and then it sticks. So I'm going to play the Wasteland. So here's my thinking. If my opponent if their next play is to play the land, Forbidden Orchard, and give me a creature, I want to Wasteland it immediately so they can't give me 2. And then maybe I can like play Spellseeker and then plow the creature. Well, that wouldn't work. But maybe I can play like Spellseeker and balance, right? Balance away my creatures. And or something along those lines, right? I'm looking for a solution to. I want to have the Wasteland in play, so that I don't. If my solution, like maybe I top deck Swords to Plowshares or whatever, and then I can just plow the creature or something. I want to have only one creature in play, though, is my point, because if I draw a single target solution to creatures, I want to use it on my own guy to prevent the Oath from activating. So that's why I play the Wasteland here. But also, decks like this don't play a lot of basic lands, and they already have 1 in play, so if they fetch, like end of turn, they fetch to, let's say they get like an Underground and they cast Vampiric Tutor or something, I can Wasteland it immediately and at least it's off the board, and I have that option. So Wasteland here, the other cards do make a lot of sense, but I'm pretty much set up for a Narset next turn thanks to the Academy and the fact that this artifact stuck, because this will get an artifact and then this will tap for 2, and that'll let me play a Narset next turn, which is the play that I really want to make. So Wasteland was just better here than playing the Academy or like a Tundra or something. I'm not going to cycle Lorien Revealed. I'm just going to keep it in my hand. It's great to have card draw. I'll go ahead and float some mana, grab myself a Voltaic Key, and slam a Narset, which sticks, I'm surprised to see. So I'm going to go ahead and slam I'm going to key this Mana Vault and go for a 1 ring here and see if that sticks. My opponent has Spell Pierce, but I have 1 mana floating, so I'm just going to pay. And then my opponent Vampiric Tutors in response to the 1 ring. I don't use it because I can always use it if I need to find a Force of Will on their turn. But if they somehow got like a Time Twister effect, I don't want to draw first. Instead, they got Flash. I'm definitely going to try and find a Force of Will. I do not. And they get an Atraxa. So Atraxa is super, super good to Oath into. Flying, Vigilance, Death Touch, Lifelink, when it comes into play, look at the top 10 cards, put a card of each type into your hand and the rest in the bottom of your library in any order. Well, my opponent revealed 10 cards, and then they were able to keep Tinker, Forbidden Orchard, and Force of Negation. So they did not keep this. They did not keep this. They did not keep that guy, Mental Misstep. They did not keep Show and Tell. They did not keep this, and they did not keep this. So my opponent flashed out Atraxa and used it as a kind of ancestral recall in a way, grabbing an Orchard, which they can use to start proccing their Oath of Druids, and a Force of Negation and a Tinker. Now, why they didn't take Force of Will here, I have no clue. That was just, I don't know, probably an oversight in their part. Maybe they misclicked or something, but this is what is in my opponent's hand minus the Orchard that they just played. So I know I'm playing against these 2 cards in hand plus 1 mystery card, and I have to try to deal with an Orchard through all this. Let's see how we do. Alright, so on my turn, I'm going to 1 ring during upkeep again, I believe. Yeah, it's almost always correct to do it during upkeep or on their turn. And then I'm going to Narset, and so I Narset into a Misdirection, and a Misdirection allows me to Force a Will, essentially, a Force of Negation. I also have my Force of Negation of my own, and so from here, my opponent forces me to have a creature in response to my Wasteland, but I now have, and they float a mana, so I'm going to clear out my attack step, play a land, clear out my attack step, so that they don't have a mana floating, in case that last unknown card in their hands, like Flusterstorm, for example. And then from here, I've got 3-4 mana, or I can Manifold Key the Vault, or I can Manifold Key the Vault, or the 1 ring here, and do some really good work with it. But I'm going to, I decide that the way that I want to play this is I want to work around days. I have enough cards, I need more mana. So we'll go ahead and just run out a Liquimetal Torque, see if for some reason they feel that this is worthy of a Force of Negation. And they do not. I didn't think they would, but it was worth a shot. And then I'll go ahead and cast myself a Jace. And Jace sticks. They don't even force it. I think maybe because they know I have the Misdirection. But either way, I'm quite happy with that. And bounce. Like I said, I only want 1 creature in play in case I have a way to remove that thing. So I could cycle Lorien here, but I definitely don't want to. I have 2 blue cards that require me to exile 2 blue cards. And Spellseeker, I certainly am not going to play against Oath. So this is one of them, but this might be the other. And then I can refill with Jace. Or I could hardcast this potentially. So there's a lot of reasons why I'm absolutely not going to do anything here. And then from there, my opponent's facing a Narset, Jace, Tolarian Academy draw. They know I have Misdirection in hand, and I have 7 cards, and they have 3 and an Oath of Druids. It basically does nothing, because even if they draw a Forbidden Orchard here, well, theoretically they could make a creature at the end of my turn, so I'd have to have a Wasteland to deal with it right away, but as it turns out I do, thanks to Yawgmoth's Will. But yeah, for the, what is that, 7th time in a row, my, almost in a row, but 7th game or whatever, my 100-card Singleton deck beat a full-powered Vintage deck, despite my opponent playing Ancestral Recall, flashing out an Atraxa, turn 1 Oath, all kinds of insanity, right? So, is this format fun? I don't know. If you enjoyed those games like I did, I certainly had a blast playing them, and like, just watching them, I'm like hungry for more games. Then that's the kind of fun that I think the format offers. Of course, I was playing against full-powered Vintage decks, so they were super linear. I think if their decks were actually Singleton decks, they would probably have far more variety of potential answers in their deck, so they wouldn't be so easily cheesed by a single card. But I know Vintage fairly well, like pretty well. Well enough that I know how to, you know, beat specific decks. And so, of course, Time Vault beats everybody if you can get it running. But you know, how to focus like the Karn play against the Oath deck and such. So it kind of does help, but that's, I think, going to not be, like, my opponents won't be quite as easy to pinpoint destroy when they are also playing Singleton decks, and I hope that my opponents are you. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Do keep in mind, if you decide to build this in paper, I recommend that in paper, 1 other card is legal and that you use it, and that card is this guy right here, Chaos Orb. So this is what my paper version would look like if I, well, had the opponents to play it against, and then had the time to make all the proxies that I need to make in order to actually play. So this is kind of what my deck would look like in paper, if you want to do a comparison. Or at least that's what I think it looks like right now. You never know, right? Like, I'm definitely still evolving. This is brand new, and there's lots of room for learning, and this is what it looks like online. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Thank you very much for watching. I look forward to seeing if I can find some VS opponents. I'll see you next time.